Whoa, 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 whoa.
Welcome to today's episode of Camden ADHD. If you have not yet done so, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never have to miss another episode. Today we are in for a treat. This podcast, we're going to enter the work of Dr. Gene Carrocia. He has his doctorate in clinical psychology, but not just that, you guys. He has been working in the ADHD community in this sphere for over 20 years with adults, adolescents, and children. He is the author of Treating ADHD and ADD in Children and Adolescents and is coming out with another book called Evaluating ADHD in Children and Adolescents. He'll talk a little further about both of these books in our podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Carrocia, for being with us today. It's so humbling and it's such a privilege to have you, your expertise, and your vision for the future. I truly, truly feel that you understand the hardship that goes through a family's heart when somebody is diagnosed with ADHD and we have no idea what to do. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Sure. Proud to be here. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Now, I know that I just gave a little bit of information about your background, but if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit more about how you came into this ADHD community, especially revolving your entire career around ADHD.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad to do that. So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and in my training, I did not receive as much training as I really thought I would have in ADHD. And so that was concerning. And then I started my career as a psychologist, working with children, adolescents, and families, also adults. And as I progressed through my career as a young clinical psychologist, I really realized there just wasn't enough information out there about this condition. And so I spent a lot of time researching it, using the foundational materials that were out there by some of the greats. But then I had to really synthesize and advance how to start to really use this in my practice in an effective way. And how could I really help people and families working with a tremendous amount of patients, day in and day out. And so I started to develop my own materials as a way of helping my patients. I had handouts and lots of evaluation materials that I was creating, synthesizing other people's work, and then building on the work that I created. And so as time went by, I started to amass more and more of this information, and I started to get more of a reputation and more of a fascination with working with children that had neurodevelopmental challenges, ADHD and other conditions. In addition to that, we also have a training program for pre-doctoral clinical psychology interns. And so I was the training director for over 15 years, working with in a very intensive training program for children that had sexual abuse, psychological trauma, and neglect. And so we had a specialty program training psychologists to work with children, adolescents, families of children and families that had these difficulties. A lot of these children had ADHD and other neurodevelopmental conditions. And so I needed to expand my training materials to really help psychologists to be, in the final years of getting their doctorates, to learn how to assess and treat families that had ADHD and neurodevelopmental challenges. So that started to give me a whole nother dimension on the training process of training these clinicians. And so finally I got to a point where I had all this material, and I really thought, I think I need to get this out there in the world. I want to help families in a richer way. And I also want to contribute to the training community of psychologists and mental health clinicians and give them materials that are very focused and specific and user-friendly, because I've been using them for over 2 decades. And so that's where, my first book that came out in last year, and then my next book is coming out next month on evaluating ADHD. So that's the quicker, long version.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I don't even know where to start with my gratitude, honestly. I feel like when I received the diagnosis for my oldest, I felt so at a loss. And as much as I love my pediatrician, it was like, well, here you go. Here's some medication and good luck. And I was an elementary school teacher, so I had been exposed to some, juvenile ADHD situations, and honestly, they were some of my very favorite students.
Sure.
And so I had a very tender heart for it, but navigating that a day-to-day life was a completely different thing. So I'm just so grateful to have you on and for all the time that you have put in to pursuing this and helping so many other families. And I can only imagine how many more lives are going to be blessed and directed because of your work. Like, honestly, I have had a chance to get onto your website, which is ADHDology, right? Is it www.adhdology.com?
.com. You got it. Yeah.
Perfect. And you guys need to go there, number one, because there's going to be some free chapters that you can download there. And then I actually went through the whole site, and you have more than just free chapters of your book there. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that? I saw some videos and some helps. Are those the ones that you were just referencing?
Yeah, thank you. So ADHDology is my company name, and it's my books and my branding. But really, it is an information source, and I really am committed to sharing this information for families. And so I've written a collection of original articles. I have some videos from some of the leaders in the ADHD world that I thought were really helpful. I also have some blog articles, of course, and then I also have lists of references and resources of websites and other books that I think are really key to understanding ADHD and some of the related conditions. So that is in addition to the free chapters for the first book, and then I'm going to put some new ones for the next book coming out, and then also some explanation of my books if people want to learn more about them. So I just really want to share this information. That's my mission, is to really help individuals with these challenges.
Well, you're doing a great job. It's a
Thank
beautiful
you.
website too, and very easy to navigate, which as a mom, once again, and as an educator, once again, means a lot to be able to
Thank you.
go to a website and find the information quickly when your brain is already racing like crazy anyway. And myself having ADHD, it was also extremely insightful. Obviously, your focus is on children, but I'll tell you, like as I was reading through, especially what I'm about to ask you about the steps of after you receive that diagnosis. It was so insightful for me, and it really gave me like the baby steps, right? The baby steps,
Great.
and outline, the beginning from the end, what I can anticipate, what I can expect. And I'm just excited to ask you to go over that whole process, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I'd love to. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I am going to present my ADHDology comprehensive treatment approach for children and adolescents. So this is predominantly for children and adolescents. However, I have worked with many adults that have ADHD and evaluated and treated them. And some of these steps can be replaced for adults, and so it's very applicable for everyone. Instead of the school phase, which is number 4, you would substitute that for work, and so for employment for adults. So what I'm going to do now is go through the 6 steps. I'm going to just tell them really quickly, and then I'm going to go back and break down these steps so that we can do a little deeper dive. This is a really quick overview. There's a lot of information. My entire Treating ADHD book is these 6 steps. That's the entire book. So there's obviously a lot of details, but I want to share in just some brief highlights so hopefully some people will get a flavor of this work and learn a little bit more about it. Okay, so here we go. So we've got 6 steps. First step is evaluating ADHD. And effectively evaluating ADHD also means exploring and detecting coexisting conditions. Second step is effective information and education about ADHD. This is one of the most important pieces of effective ADHD management from a long-term approach. People really have to understand this condition. Seems like that's a really simple step, but it's really important. Third step is addressing and managing ADHD at home. There's a bunch of dimensions to that. I'm going to break that down in a moment. Fourth step, addressing and managing ADHD issues at school. So this does include homework, but it includes some other kinds of issues with school. We're going to talk about that briefly. Number 5 is considering medication treatment. Medication can be dramatically effective. However, there are some specifics that I really like to encourage people to consider when they do that. It's a controversial topic and a very personal one about whether people are going to use medication or not. Last step, number 6, is utilizing additional and alternative ADHD approaches and treatments. And so there's a bunch of evidence-based and treatments that have some really good effectiveness to them. There's all kinds of approaches that people use that don't have as much research and effectiveness. Or these are the pieces, the treatments that I found to be effective that have science behind.
I'm so excited for you to start to hear more in detail about these 6 amazing steps that Dr. Jean Carrocia has researched for so long. And likewise, I wanted to do something important to help you as well. Start this year off feeling like you've got a leg up, feeling like you've got something moving forward and positive in your life. And so I have teamed up with 4 of my favorite mental health advocates. I've teamed up with ADHD Rachel, with Family ADHD Coach, with Summer Wilda, and Beyond the ADHD Diagnosis. And we together have put together a beautiful mental health package, including 2 free coaching sessions. Guys, this value is so big. I'm so excited to be able to give this to you. It's going to be so easy. Head over to my Instagram, Camden_ADHD, and all the instructions will be there. Pretty much follow me, follow my 4 friends who you're going to get so much value out of, and tag a friend that has been there with you throughout your whole journey. You've got to see all the other giveaways that are in there. You're going to be blown away. So excited to be able to share some of my favorite things with you and have you benefit for the rest of the year because we started it right in January. Okay, now back to Dr. Carrocia.
Okay, so here we go. We're going to break these down. The first one is evaluating ADHD. So the beginning of ADHD treatment is evaluating it effectively. And unfortunately, not enough people are receiving effective identification and diagnosing of ADHD. If it's not diagnosed properly, the treatment is not going to be effective, and families are going to continue to struggle, to spin, to have difficulty. So we really want families to understand the diagnostic process. Basically, there are 2 choices when you have ADHD evaluations or detecting it. The first one is a brief ADHD evaluation. This can be done by mental health clinicians. I would recommend clinical psychologists doing this as part of outpatient care, but there's also plenty of mental health therapists that have master's degrees that can do this. Also, pediatricians can do this. This can be challenging because sometimes pediatricians are not well trained in this and they are not interested in doing this, and their practices sometimes aren't designed for this. However, there are some pediatricians that have a lot of experience that are very passionate about this, that are going to do this in an evidence-based way. I wrote an entire second book on evaluating effectively, and I wrote that for pediatricians and the mental health community. But it is important to ask their pediatricians and clinicians, do you feel that you can effectively evaluate ADHD? There's plenty of pediatricians that say, this is just not my thing. I really recommend you go somewhere else. I would encourage them getting evaluations and having a proper evaluation. The second way of diagnosing ADHD is a little more comprehensive, and that is called a neurodevelopmental or neuropsychological assessment. This is a more extensive process. It's much more expensive. There's fewer neuropsychologists out there. Neuropsychologists are not neurologists. They're a specialty type of psychologist. And a whole report is generated with a lot of helpful recommendations. Again, there's fewer providers. They're not in rural communities, and there can be some challenges doing that. However, if there are coexisting conditions, if there's learning disorder concerns, if there's other more complex diagnostic presentations, the neurodevelopmental testing is really the best way to go. So part of the process of evaluating should be detecting coexisting conditions. I'm really passionate about spreading the word that ADHD is a foundational disorder. It often accompanies other conditions. And so more than any other condition out there, ADHD often has other conditions along with it. There can be medical conditions, sleep disorders, neurodevelopmental conditions, psychological conditions, sensory processing conditions, and fetal substance exposure conditions. And all of these can coexist with ADHD, they can worsen ADHD, or they can have ADHD-like presentations when true ADHD doesn't exist. So we're back to the diagnostics, which is really the foundation. People really need to help and advocate for their children and their families to work with the best providers to really detect what's going on. Sometimes children and families can have diagnostically complex presentations that confuse and baffle clinicians. And we really want to pierce through that and go to a variety of providers and really try to understand what conditions each person has. The more conditions they have, the more management they're going to need. And when these are hidden conditions and they're not detected, children only partially get better or don't get better at all. And then families and teachers and the communities get overwhelmed by these individuals. And there's no bad guys with ADHD. This is nobody's fault.
Yeah.
So it's really about learning and understanding that there might be other things going on. So I'm a really big advocate of that. Some of the most frequent coexisting conditions with ADHD are sleep conditions, which is insomnia, trouble falling asleep, inadequate hours of sleep, speech and articulation difficulties, expressive and receptive language disorders, fine and gross motor problems, dysgraphia, which is handwriting difficulties, reading and math learning disorders, bedwetting problems, problematic video game use, or called gaming disorder, depression, anxiety, oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, substance abuse for adolescents and adults, sensory processing conditions, and fetal alcohol spectrum and fetal alcohol drug exposure and obesity. So I went through those really quickly. There's a lot there, there's a lot more, but I just wanted to highlight on those.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of conditions that I really like to recommend that's part of an ADHD evaluation, getting hearing evaluations, vision evaluations. Sometimes these are very basic things. School screenings are not adequate enough to do those. So sometimes those are very basic things, but they really should be considered. There's other things like auditory processing disorder or visual processing disorder or other sensory processing disorders that can really mimic ADHD and learning problems. And it's really great when those are identified because there are specific treatments for those. Sleep is a highly prevalent problem. When anybody has ADHD, they have much greater problems with sleep difficulties. And so it's really important that that gets diagnosed. Inadequate sleep is an epidemic in the United States. Not enough children and adults are getting enough sleep. We're going to talk a little later that actually increasing the amount of sleep is actually an intervention I recommend to improving ADHD and neuro functioning. So it's something to think about.
Wow.
There's sleep disorder breathing, which I'd like to educate people about. Children that snore should be getting evaluations. Open mouth breathing can look identical to ADHD, cause all kinds of mood and ADHD related problems. And sleep apnea is a serious condition that children and adults should be thinking about, and it can cause a lot of attention problems. So I know there's a lot in this step, and I'm spending a bunch of time with this, but I really want to help people really understand this. The last thing I want to share is that schools are not the most comprehensive diagnostic providers. So sometimes families have a misunderstanding that if they're getting school services and they've gotten some kind of school evaluation, that the school knows what's going on or their problems have been addressed. And that's just really not the case. Sometimes families have a false sense of, well, the school's doing something, they're getting services, everything's okay. Schools are not designed to be psychological or medical providers. I really encourage any family, if a child has a 504 and IEP, please go to outside providers for more comprehensive evaluations and treatment. Do not rely on the school to be the only providers. So that is the first step. Okay, second step is education and information about ADHD. It's really important for families to understand that this is a neurodevelopmental condition. This is not an emotional or psychological disorder. This is a disorder of brain functioning. And when people really understand that, then they can more effectively manage it over time. It can be quite a challenge when people aren't really understanding this. So there's websites, there's podcasts like this, there's videos. People need to be educated to really have a better understanding. Once a diagnosis is received, I like to encourage people to go through the grieving process and really move towards acceptance. Acceptance of ADHD doesn't mean that you like ADHD. It means that you have a realistic understanding of this as a disability, and everyone has strengths and weaknesses. So we need to be fair to people that have these disabilities. They can have effective, wonderful, great lives as long as they have support and people around them that can understand when they have challenges and the support and skills and assistance that they need. So it's a really important piece of that. Third phase is addressing and managing ADHD at home. There's a whole bunch of things that parents can do about this. Effective behavior management is one of the most important things. Using consequences effectively, having behavioral expectations attached to consequences, having expectation routines when there are challenges in the morning, after school, or going to evening, having very clear systems about that. Being prepared out in public with behavioral systems is very excellent. Also, maximizing parental effectiveness at home is really important. Parents need to stop talking excessively, calmly give consequences, change their unproductive thinking, avoid power struggles, work on healthy detachment. A whole bunch of pieces about that are really, really important. Also, parents should be working on improving their relationships with their children, because there's a lot of lion taming that goes on, and parents can get in a role of yelling and screaming and chasing and raising their voice, and then that affects the quality of the relationship. So parents need to specifically, outside of their discipline, work on how to connect with a child as a person and have that special relationship. Parental stress is much higher with families that have ADHD, and that needs to be acknowledged, and parents need long-term plans on self-care and how to take care of themselves. And then when parents have ADHD themselves, it genetically runs in families, it's very common, they need to look at their own ADHD and manage their own ADHD, if for no one else, for the family. Because when moms and dads are managing their ADHD, they're better able to help their family. We also want to look at getting other kinds of treatments, so family and individual therapy. ADHD coaching can be really, really effective. I've been working more and more with ADHD coaches, and I'm a big fan of that. Addressing oppositional defiant disorder, which has a high comorbidity with ADHD. So that's really important to get a handle on that. Teaching parent-child conflict skills and addressing sibling issues can be really important. Last piece here is sleep, addressing sleep difficulties, improving sleep hygiene, addressing some of the challenges because sleep problems are so prevalent. Sleep studies might also be needed, so that's something that should be considered for families that are having sleep difficulties. The fourth phase is addressing and managing school issues. There's a lot here. I'm a big fan of using homework notebook systems, which is a system where the child writes down their homework, and then the teachers get a signature, and they come home and they get a positive or a negative consequence based on that on a daily basis. It helps the child take responsibility and works on organizational skills. There's a version of that for school behavior management problems. So they come home, they have consequences at home. It can improve their motivation, which is really great. I have a whole chapter on 504s and IEPs. It's very important for parents to know what their rights are and how to navigate the school system. Some schools are really great, they're really helpful. Some can be really challenging because it can be costly to get IEP services. And so I'm a big advocate of utilizing that as much as possible to give children and families as many resources as possible. And then there's other things that families can do. They can work with teachers, they can become a detective when grades are going down, teach study skills, encourage reading with a lot of rewards at home, using tutoring, which a lot of families need, using educational therapists, which are really a newer service, are very interesting. There's also a whole bunch of classroom things that teachers can utilize if they're motivated for. Fifth phase is medication treatment. Research shows that medication, along with effective behavior management training for parents, are the most effective ways of managing ADHD. So I'm a big proponent of those. There's a lot to say about to medicate or not, and people have a lot of feelings about that. If they do use medication, finding an effective provider, understanding how the medication prescription process works, and people have to partner with their physicians and prescribers. Getting the right medication at the right dose is a really important concept, and then being aware of the clock when people are using stimulants. So the stimulants wear off, and sometimes people aren't aware of this, and it's something to be aware of. Last sixth phase is using additional and alternative ADHD treatments. There's a bunch of ADHD dietary approaches. Diet in and of itself usually doesn't cure or fix ADHD. There's a lot of information out that, but in a comprehensive way, it can contribute. So healthier eating can help. A higher protein, lower carbs, lower sugar diet can be very helpful for ADHD brains. Eliminating foods and drinks with artificial additives. Some children have an extreme sensitivity to that, and that's something to think about. And then when children have sensitivities or allergies to foods, it's very important to manage that approach. Also, I'm a big fan of fish oil supplements, increasing sleep as an intervention, increasing physical activity. Green time, which is playing in green spaces outside, is really good. Some good research on that. And then finally, the alternative providers, there's some really wonderful stuff. I'm a huge fan of neurofeedback. It's one of the interventions that can permanently change brains, and it's really, really exciting to see people have permanent improvements with neurofeedback. There's a lot of different types of neurofeedback and providers, so it's not magic. There's some information on that. Also, detecting deficiencies in certain minerals and vitamins. There's a Walsh biochemical approach, which is revolutionary, which I talk about in some of my materials. It involves special testing and special pharmacy approaches, but I'm trying to spread the word on this because it's got some great research and it's really
Mhm.
revolutionary for changing people's brains and their functioning. And
Wow.
then finally, there's some interesting stuff with Brain Gym, which is some brain balancing exercises, and Ball of Visax, which is an occupational therapy approach, which can help too. So that is my approach. That's the ADHD
Wow.
treatment approach.
Huh. I am so inspired right now. I mean, talk about every thought that has ever in question has ever gone through a mother's brain and my own brain in terms of how do I get started? Where do I go? What do I do? I mean, good job. I think you did that under 10 minutes. That was amazing. I'm so excited for people to be able to learn more, to access your book and to access all of this knowledge that you have been compiling that is so powerful. And honestly, when we have something like that at our fingertips, it's hopeful.
Right.
I feel
Hope.
like
Hope is so important.
it's bringing so much more hope to people that, yes, you do have a hard situation. You have, okay, a challenge. There's a challenge, in front of you, but instead of trying to figure that all out on your own, here's a roadmap of sorts.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I mean, that is absolutely fantastic. Now, will you remind us again the name of your book and where we can find this book?
Sure. Sure. So the name of the book is Treating ADHD slash ADD in Children and Adolescents, Solutions for Parents and Clinicians. And it was published last year by Charles C. Thomas Publishing. It's on Amazon. It's on Goodreads. It's on, I think it's Google Play sells it. So, anywhere you can buy books. And again, if you go to my website, there's a link to get you to Amazon. So that should be pretty easy too.
Excellent. And I'll go ahead and include that in the information here as well. If you're on YouTube, you can take a look at that down in the information below. And then obviously you just gave the access to, once again, www.adhdology.com, where you can find this incredible book. So I know that you said that you're launching your second book next month. Is that
Second
correct?
book.
So if a mother or a teacher even was looking to learn a little bit more about ADHD and how to navigate, which of those two books would you recommend?
Yeah, great question, Camden. Thank you. So the first book is really written for everybody, for parents and clinicians to give them the roadmap. And I talk about some of the diagnostics and things to think about when they're getting evaluations and things to include their providers. The second book is Evaluating ADHD. And I wrote it predominantly for clinicians to teach them. And I have 10 steps on how to effectively evaluate from an evidence-based um, perspective on how to evaluate effectively ADHD. I then go through the many coexisting conditions with ADHD or things that clinicians should be thinking about that can also look like ADHD when it's not true ADHD. And then the third part of that book is checklists. And it's checklists for every condition that I think about, and users have permission to reproduce those checklists for their own personal use, so clinicians can make copies, put them in their folders, and use them forever. And
Mm.
so the checklist should then be screeners to help people understand, gee, do they have these other conditions? But families and parents that are savvy could also use these checklists to say, well, gee, does my child have an auditory processing disorder, which really looks like ADHD? Maybe I should go to an audiologist to figure that out. Or, do they have concentration deficit disorder, which looks almost identical to inattentive ADHD, but
Hmm.
is really a different neurodevelopmental condition, or a reading learning disorder, and it might coexist or it might be different. So I get into all of those details in the second and third part, but the checklist, I've made those to be user-friendly for anyone to be able to screen all these other conditions that may occur with ADHD.
Awesome. So the checklist is found in the second book then, is that correct?
Yes, second book.
Okay. So I guess I have a question in terms of the first book sounds like my jam right now. That sounds like
Gotcha.
something where I'd want to start, right?
Sure.
And I recognize that as we're talking about coexisting conditions specifically, that some kids are a little bit more complex in their diagnosis than
Right.
diagnoses than others. And so if the first book has been conquered, if you will, if the first book you've gone through your steps and your child is still kind of a puzzle, would
Right.
that be an appropriate time to access the second? Would you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said, Camden. Thank you. So, yeah, so the first book is the foundational book, covers everything. But if you feel like, gee, there's something else going on with my child, we're doing the meds, we're doing all this treatment, things are not progressing, the treatment isn't really progressing, we're still having school and learning challenges, then there's probably something else going on. And so, yes, then I would say it's time to do a deeper dive. I've also encouraging families that aren't clinicians to use these checklists and bring them to the providers and
Hmm.
show them this information and partner with them and say, hey, I've done this little screening thing. What do you think? Here's what I've come up with. Show them the checklist so that they can
Yeah.
look at that and then they can build on that. Also in the book, I talk about which specialists treat the different conditions that are in the
Oh,
checklist
that's
so that they know
awesome.
exactly where they should be going, because unfortunately with providers, there's not enough providers that are talking to each other. And
Yeah.
this is part of the problem. We don't have, really integrated healthcare records at this point. Hopefully that will be in the future. But because we have all these specialists that aren't talking, eh, there is some gaps, and really that's affecting the quality of care and the diagnostics. So unfortunately, parents have to kind of do a lot of their own legwork. And this is a one way to do it.
Wow. I love it. I'm seeing your vision. I'm seeing your vision, and I just appreciate it. I really do. And I think that I'm probably speaking for thousands of people that are going to continue to benefit from this. So that's just amazing. And I
Thank
can
you.
feel, yeah, no, honestly. And I can feel like from you, especially as you were talking, just breezing through all that stuff, but I could just feel from you like the intense desire you have for these families to be bettered. And I love how you talked about coaching and parents that might actually have ADHD themselves, that they recognize that and they advocate for themselves and that they have
Absolutely.
self-care as well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I just feel like you're not leaving anything out, that you're filling all the gaps and you're being really honest. And also your idea about grieving about grieving that diagnosis and recognizing it, staring it straight in the face. It is important to recognize that while this isn't going to be like a complete negative thing, it's different than what you were anticipating, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that there is that.
It's an important topic, because when people are able to really accept this with their hearts and make peace with it and stop fighting the problems and the diagnosis and the challenges, whether people are fully diagnosed or not, it really allows parents to come from a place of deeper compassion and having a better understanding that these challenges are not the child's fault.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, parents are on the front line when they're struggling every day of, why do I have to keep telling you to put your shoes on and stop doing that and pick this up and don't do this and do, they get into the lion tamer mode.
Yeah.
And, really, these disorders are invisible. So you can see the behaviors, but you can't see people's brains. And when people don't have the diagnostics, and then when they don't really understand what these conditions are and the disabilities that are involved with them, then they just get into this thing where everybody loses. So parents feel like bad guys because they're in a bad mood, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're being ineffective to try to motivate their children. And then the kids are feeling bad about themselves because they don't understand that. So I like to say that, for people in Seattle or England, it rains a lot. And so when most people that live in these communities, when it rains, they don't go outside cursing the heavens. Why is it raining today? This is so unfair. I hate that it rains. Why this is not, this is not what I need today. This is slowing me down. So if you fight the rain, you're going to lose every day. So what
Mhm.
people in these communities do is they say, well, it's raining, and they manage it and they work around it, and they have systems and umbrellas and ways that they handle that. And they're not fighting the rain. They've accepted the rain. They might not like it, but they've accepted it. And this is really what we want to do with families with neurodevelopmental challenges. We want them to really accept the rain, make peace with the disorders. It doesn't mean that every day is good. It doesn't mean that everything is fine. It just means that they're able to use their energies in a different way and focus on solutions and not get stuck in the negativity, which is such a challenge for families sometimes.
And thank you for recognizing that.
Yeah,
It's hard to describe sometimes, what us families really do go through from sun up to sundown, and sometimes all
absolutely.
throughout the night with that sleeping disorder, portion. The last thing is I did notice that on your website you have a spreadsheet or a grid of all the medications, because
Yes,
that's like one of the biggest, it's a hot button topic right now.
right.
And so it looks like that you had like the non-stimulant and the stimulants,
Yep,
and then the side effects you can anticipate,
yep.
and the active ingredient that's in it.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to make that known, that that's a resource. It's awesome. I've been looking for something like that personally, and to
Yeah.
stumble upon that today on your website was like, yay, I have a place to start.
Yeah, thank you, Camden. People can print that out. They can, take that with them to their physician visits. I was really lucky to find a psychiatrist who allowed me to use that. So that was his original work, and now
Wow.
it's on the website. It's also in the book, but that should be a guide. And people, there's a lot of different medications out there, and so unfortunately, with the medication process, families don't understand it. They try one medication, they give up because they feel like, oh, we tried meds, it doesn't work. Unfortunately, you have to you need the right dose at the right with the right medication for the right balancing. And so in the future, this is all going to be determined through genetics and special testing, but we're in the
Yeah.
old-fashioned days. So we have to do trial and error, which is really unfortunate. But it really can dramatically change lives. I've seen a lot of people really improve on the right medications. It's just families have to understand that process, and they need a lot of support during that. So I have a whole chapter in the book about things that and principles and things that they should be doing while they're effectively partnering with their prescribing physicians.
Awesome. And then with that, while we're talking about, partnering physicians, so pediatricians versus psychologists versus, do you have an insight as to who might be the best fit to prescribe the medication,
Sure.
and stimulant
Sure.
versus non-stimulant? Because
Right.
if I could get like one question when we talk about meds, that would be it.
Sure,
And then we
sure.
can end right there.
So, yeah, in most states, psychologists aren't prescribing. So your prescribers are really mostly going to be your primary care physicians, pediatricians, or psychiatrists. There's some advanced practice nurses that prescribe. There's some neurologists that prescribe, but really just focusing on the pediatricians versus psychiatrists. I like to encourage people to go to psychiatrists when possible, because they are specialists and they tend to know these medications more. One of the challenges with pediatricians is that they tend to under-medicate. They're too conservative because they're overly safe, and safety is important, obviously, and a very critical piece. But if people aren't using an effective dose, they're not going to be getting the brain balancing that they need for medication. And so pediatricians just don't tend to have as much experience or training with that. Saying that, there are some pediatricians that really are really good with medication, have a lot of experience. Maybe they have children with their own children, and they understand it and might be a little more effective with it. But given all things, I like to encourage people to go to psychiatrists and do that. And so also there's stimulants versus non-stimulants. The non-stimulants, Strattera is one of the brand names, can be really good. The problem with Strattera is that it doesn't tend to work for as many people as the stimulants,
Hmm.
and it's not as effective with the hyperactivity part of it. So it's not an option for a lot of people sometimes, but when it works very well. Everyone's brain is different. We're all
Yeah.
biochemically unique. And so until we have more specific testing, it's a lot of trial and error with medications. So I'm convinced in the future they're going to look back, they're going to say, oh, those poor people in 2020, they were so primitive, they just had to try different medications to see what worked, and it was trial and error, and the way we look back into the Middle Ages. But hopefully testing is going to be much more specific, so people are a lot more focused with the medication they use.
And you would encourage medication with, I remember you just said like fish oil, taking both, right? The nutrition side and the prescription side.
Yeah, so with a comprehensive ADHD approach, it really is up to the parent about how much they're going to incorporate. So fish oil is relatively safe. I encourage everybody to talk to their prescribers about if they're using any supplements. Generally, you can take fish oil with a lot of medications, and sometimes it can even reduce the need for a little higher dosage with the fish oil. Everyone's different. You have to have the right levels of fish oil. It takes about at least 3 months of it to see what works with it. It generally doesn't replace medication. I wish I could say it does, but it doesn't. But it can really, help people and even reduce their dosing. So I like to recommend that.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for being with us, and what a pleasure. And everybody go out and take a look at this book. And if not, go to his website and sign up for his free chapters. And then you're going to want to get the book anyway. So, but all the resources he has there, all the expertise and all the time he's put into this so that we don't, so that we can see for ourselves the full spectrum. That's what I really like that you do, so that we can see the full spectrum and decide for ourselves what is going to be best for us without having to visit 18,000 different websites.
Right.
Pretty awesome. So thanks again. And once again, this is Camden ADHD. So glad that you guys tuned in today. Once again, Dr. Carrocia, thank you so much for being with us. And until next time, we'll see you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Dr. Jean Carrocia, for all of your time, your expertise, your information. This is going to bless the lives of so many people that are struggling in big ways. Especially if you are struggling with ADHD, we understand it's hard to get started, but we can follow a list. We can follow steps, and that's what he has given us today. To all of my beautiful people out there, if you have not yet done so, please subscribe. This is a place where you can find community and love. And I just want to remind you that whatever it is, whatever you're getting after, you can and you will.